crossing county lines just to make my name in the city. Took everything, put it on the line, cause I never break or back down. One shot is do or die, and the odds ain't looking too pretty. But I got the feeling it's my time. I know I'm taking it now.
Good morning and welcome to the Retirement Learning Lab, where we teach you how to retire without running out of money. My name is Van Richards, and today we're going to be talking about how to use ESG and retirement. That is ESG also with personal investing. Now, before we begin into that today, I want to remind you that if you're listening to this live at 11 o'clock on Tuesday, you can be part of the live stream. All you need to do is enter in your questions and enter in your comments into your platform. We'll see them and we'll talk about them today, so you can be part of the program too. The other thing is, if you're listening to this on YouTube Live, that is, make sure that you hit the subscribe button so that you can get notified when there is new content which is posted to that particular platform. Also, at the end of this video, listen for an important disclosure. Well, to begin in with this particular topic, I think the best way to frame this is by looking at it from the standpoint of a person that's retiring. One of the biggest fears that people have when they do retire is going to be running out of money. And right up there with that fear of running out of money is really the fear of being taken advantage of. I don't know about you, but once or twice in my lifetime, I've had the regrettable occurrence of being taken advantage of, and it really didn't feel very good. Quite frankly, it kind of made me feel a little stupid. There were a time or two when things happened and someone or something took advantage of me. When I say thing, I'd say corporation took advantage of me, and I just really felt vulnerable from that standpoint. That's where ESG comes into place. ESG stands for environmental, social, and governance. And that is a focus of investing, that if you're investing in an investment that is considered ESG conscious, it's going to be focused on having good environmental, good social, and good governance from that standpoint. But that really brings in a little bit of a problem from the standpoint of the individuality. What you suppose is going to be a good environmental policy might not be what I think or someone else thinks. And that certainly is true with social issues that we're seeing nowadays, and also true with governance of corporations. All of that is really individual. It is as individual as trying to define a color to someone. If I ask you this question, if I said, could you describe to me what the color blue is? What would you say? How would you think of that? Take a look at this for a minute. I think it'll emphasize the point that I'm talking about. Defining colors is as individual as anything else that there could possibly be, perhaps other than ESG. Your particular preferences, your morals, and your beliefs might not match up with someone else's from that standpoint. So that's the idea behind ESG, and that's the very first focus of ESG, is really to define what your particular beliefs are, what you think is important to you. Once you define that, then your job is to go out there and find that particular type of investment. Now, what I'm going to do today is I'm going to talk about the three topics, the E, the S, and the G, and I'm going to give you some different examples of companies and their particular policies. Some of them you may be in favor of, and some of them you may not be in favor of. Now, my point today is this. What I want to be able to do is to show you some instances of what can occur. I'm not here today to say this is a bad policy or this is a good policy. I'm here to show you what is possible and to encourage you to formulate your particular opinions. So let's begin looking at it from this standpoint. The very first thing that you need to be able to do when you're looking for an ESG investment is clarify your particular investment beliefs. It might be something because you're a Christian and you want not to invest in companies that are not within your beliefs. It also might be that you're vegan, so you don't want to invest in companies that partake in animal cruelty or use animal parts or anything like that that's associated with cruelty to animals. So you need to clarify your particular beliefs, and there's a lot of different ways to do that. The second thing that you need to be able to do is you need to determine which investment process matches your particular beliefs. There's actually 6 of these, and I'm not going to go through all of them today. I'll encourage you to go over to my blog, which is at richardsfinancialplanning.com. If you go down to the bottom of the page and you see the blog, click on that and you'll see the most recent post. And that will tell you as you go through it, the 6 different principle-based investing methods that exist. Now, let me tell you what 2 of them are. I think this will kind of clarify it. There's negative principle-based investing and there's positive principle-based investing. Negative is this way. Let's say, for example, if I don't want to invest in companies that are related to animal cruelty or to animal testing or use any type of animal products in their manufacturing, that would be negative. Let's say, on the other hand, if I wanted to have something that is a positive principle-based investment method, that would be, I want to make sure that it's a company, let's use Christianity or biblical principles as an example. I want to make sure that I invest in a company that exhibits Christian beliefs or will follow Christian principles. That's a positive combination. So the idea is you need to be able to pick the particular method that's going to be best for you. And then simply the next thing to do is going to be just basically to set up an account and then monitor it as it goes by. It's really a very simple process. Now, to begin with, what I'm going to do today is I'm going to go through, as I mentioned, the E, the S, and the G, and I'm going to describe a couple of different companies and their circumstances, and then encourage you to decide whether this would be the type of company that you would want to invest in. And then you take that information and use it in whatever personal investing that you're doing. And remember, I'm not here to recommend investments to you today. What I'm here to do is to disclose information that you can use in whatever that you're doing from that standpoint. So let's go back to seeing what we're talking about today. The very first thing that I want to talk about is E for environmental. And you may have seen this in the news recently. This was about a company called Norsec Nickel. Now, I know that there's probably some wonderful people that work at Norsec Nickel, but Norsec Nickel has a not very good history from that standpoint. It's in Norsec, Russia, and Norsec Nickel was developed in the time of communism when it was more prevalent in Russia. It was built by within the gulags from that standpoint, and there wasn't very much environmental consciousness that was used in making nickel from that particular area. Now, Norsec Nickel is a company that is a public company that you could buy on the exchanges. But the question is going to be, would you really want to, because of what their history is from the environment? There was a study which was done actually it was several years ago, but it hasn't changed that much. But Norsec Nickel and Norsec, Russia was voted as and determined to be one of the most polluted places on Earth. Within 30 miles of the nickel smelter in Norsec, Russia, there is not a tree that is growing at all. The report that I'm talking about is actually from Time magazine, and it was reporting on the world's most polluted places. You may have seen this recently in the news. Actually, Today is the 14th. Yesterday was the 13th. This was reported in the Wall Street Journal yesterday. You probably can't see this because it's going to show up upside down, but I'm just going to show you what it is. This was in, actually, it does show up correctly. Good for me. This was in yesterday's Wall Street Journal, and you'll see that Russia, Norsec Nickel involved in new Arctic fuel spill. Now, when it says new Arctic fuel spill, this is what's happening. There were 45 tons of jet fuel that were spilled, and that was considered to be an emergency. This just happened yesterday, but that's not the first time that Norsec Nickel has had an infraction in environmental pollution. Back around May the 29th into June, Norsec Nickel released 20,000 tons of diesel fuel into the environment. Now, that's a really big amount. If you remember back to the Exxon Valdez in the 80s, there was only 21,000 tons. Well, I say only, there was 21,000 tons of diesel fuel that was released by that ship in Alaska. 20,000 tons is a huge amount. It's a huge amount. That was such a large amount that the president of Russia, Vladimir Putin, did declare it to be a national emergency. The company is supposedly going to be fined, but the problem is going to be that Norsec Nickel has not a very good history of polluting the environment. Well, in telling you that, and if you're a person that wants to be environmentally conscious in your investments, you're probably saying, there's no way that I would want to buy the stock of that investment. Well, you also need to investigate the portfolios. If you invest in ETFs or in mutual funds, you want to make sure that that company is not in there. One of the things that I do for clients is I show them how to set up something that's called a direct index. And a direct index, it's very easy. If I know that I don't want to have that company in the portfolio, I just overlay a exclusion and say, make sure that this is not included in the index that we're investing in. It works out pretty simple from that standpoint. But when we're talking about what the company produces, there's different types of pollution that companies will emit. There's actually, they're considered into three different categories. Not to get too geeky into this, but there's scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 pollution. Scope 1 is the pollution that the company itself is emitting. When we get down to scope 3, this is something that is emitted by a company that is producing a product that's used. An example is going to be electric cars. If you look at one of the most important components of an electric car, it is nickel. That's what makes the batteries, that's what makes the cars possible. Would you want to invest in an electric car maker that bought their nickel from Norsec Nickel? That's a quandary. But some people think of it from this standpoint. They think of it and say, well, the electric car maker is making cars that's going to reduce the carbon footprint of a lot of people. And that reduction in pollution is worth the pollution that exists from Norsec Nickel. I'm not saying that's right. I'm not here to say one way or the other, but I'm here to tell you that that's one particular thought that you need to consider when you're thinking about investing, and that is the E, the environmental, in ESG. You may be investing in an electric car maker, but that electric car maker may get its nickel from Norsec Nickel. Now, I'll clear this up. I'm not alluding to any particular company at all. As a matter of fact, the most popular electric car company right now is Tesla. Tesla, to the best of my knowledge, does not get its nickel from Norsec Nickel. It's such an important component that they're investigating doing their own mining operations. And I believe that most of the nickel for Tesla's batteries comes actually from Australia. So I'm not alluding to any particular car maker, but in your investing, this is something that you'll need to investigate and to make sure that it fits your criteria. So let's go back to this from this standpoint. All right, moving on to S for social. Social can cover a lot of different ground. It can be gender-based, it can be race-based, it can be religion. The social aspect of ESG is quite broad. Now, just because a company comes forth and says that we support social issues, you need to investigate just a little bit more fully. And I want to use an example that I think that a lot of people are aware of right now with the problems that exist with some racial injustice that's occurring throughout our country. In the company that I want to use is going to be Nike. Nike is a company that's been at the forefront of pushing the envelope of social justice for race diversity, for gender diversity. And I think that that's really a good thing from a personal standpoint. And there I go. I'm not really here to tell you what's good or bad. I'm here basically to identify what you need to be aware of so that you can make your own decisions. Now, you might remember back in September of 2018, that's when Nike signed Colin Kaepernick to an advertising campaign. That could be looked at as a very positive step forward towards racial injustice and towards helping to eliminate racial injustice. But I want you to be aware that Nike did not do this completely out of a selfless effort from that standpoint. I want you to look at really what's happening under the hood from a racial disparity, from a diversity standpoint at Nike. Let's look at a couple of different numbers. Between 2018 and 2019, after the Colin Kaepernick advertisement, the company increased its revenues, its media, by $163 million. The value of the company increased $6 billion. They had a 31% boost in sales. And in 2019, the company was valued at over $32 billion. Now, that's a huge number. That's a 32 with 12 zeros. That's a lot of money. Now, Nike is putting forth a lot of effort, though, in helping with diversity. I want to point out a couple of different things. The first thing I do want to say is good for them. They have pledged that they're going to put in $40 million into Black community organizations over the next 4 years, and that's a great thing. But take a look at what's happening inside of Nike. Perhaps this is something that they need to investigate and they need to take some steps forward. We'll take a look in a moment at what's happening at Cisco Systems and what's happened there over the past few years. And I think that you'll see the difference between the two. The workforce at Nike right now is really 44% white and only 22% Black, 19% Latino Hispanic, 9% Asian, and 6% of other races. Now, when you look at what's happening at the management level, there's even a larger disparity in diversity that exists. With executive management and upper management at Nike, only 70, actually, let's start it out this way. 76% of the company is white in the upper management. Only 6% is Black. 4% is Latino Hispanic, 9% Asian, and 5% is other. Now, as I said before, I'm not here to cast stones. I'm here to basically point out what you might want to look at if you want to invest in companies and racial disparity or diversity is something that's really important to you. Look at what's going on. Now, I will applaud Nike for this. They do make these numbers public. And there are a lot of companies that do not make this information public. There was a study which was done by MSCI, a rating company, and they found that actually only a little over 100 large companies really showed under the hood what's going on from a standpoint of internal diversity. A good example of something that's happening and has been happening is over at Cisco Systems. Take a look what's been happening there. In 2016, they launched a program that was called the Diverse Representation Framework, and this has been the impact of what's happened within Cisco Systems. 48% of the company is made up of minorities in the general workforce. 38% of frontline managers are minorities. They've taken a very big step forward, and they are helping diversity a great deal. And recently, they've also stepped up, just like Nike has, and they are donating quite a bit of money to different companies, are donating quite a bit of money to organizations who are focused on diversity. All right. Let's move on to the G for governance, because G in governance is something that's a little bit confusing to people, because if you think, how can I monitor the governance of a company? Well, I'll tell you this. One of the best ways that you can do it is by using a service like I've mentioned, MSCI. There's also S&P. Morningstar has a rating system also. I really like Morningstar's rating system because it's like their star system for rating the potential for their investments. 1 star being overvalued, 5 stars being undervalued. In the ESG arena, the way that Morningstar does it is they rate it by globes. If you have 1 globe, you have a poor ESG record. If you have 5 globes, you have a great ESG record. But there again, we go back to that same thing of defining the color blue. Do you agree with all that? So the idea also might be looking a little bit more individually at companies. And let's get into the G of governance, because there's really a big one that's happened recently, actually in June. In June, we saw Wirecard, which is a money processing company that's based in Germany. And we saw Wirecard go from a multi-billion-dollar company to bankruptcy. Now, if you look back a little further, if you look at the Financial Times or the Wall Street Journal, they'll give you a timeline of what happened and how things went bad at Wirecard. And it actually has a longer tail. It has a longer history than just what happened in June. But everything came to a head in June. The company itself was run by Marcus Braun, who's now the ex-CEO. And the problem was that he couldn't really account for approximately $2.15 billion that was missing from the company. And what happened is the company had an audit that was done by an outside auditor, and the outside auditor would not sign off on it, and basically brought it to the forefront that there was a lot of unaccounted for assets at the company. And it was like at that point, it was like a wall of stone that just started to fall quickly from there. If you look at the graph that I'm showing you, this was from the Wall Street Journal, and it shows what happened from the timeline standpoint. This is actually in 2019. The value of the shares was, close to $200 per share. And by the end of June, it was basically bankrupt, down to just about zero from that standpoint. So why is it important that you understand what went wrong at Wirecard? The reason why that it's important is because it will help you when you're identifying investments and looking for how those companies are monitored. If you understand how they're monitored, then that'll help you to determine, is this a company that I really want to put my money into? The first thing that really went wrong was that there was very little oversight of Mr. Braun's authority at Wirecard. Marcus Braun also served as the chief technology officer, which really is not, it's unheard of in companies of that size. Usually you have quite a few people that cover specific roles. And Mr. Braun was not only CEO, but he was also chief technology officer. He started the company back in 2002. And as time went by, the company grew quite a bit, but their oversight didn't. The oversight committee for the company was quite small. For a company of that size, when you compare it to other companies, The large companies have about 14 committee members that are in an oversight committee. Wirecard only had 6. Now, these were red flags which were brought to the forefront by some outside rating services, such as MCI. There was not an audit committee at all in between 2002, when the company began, and 2019. Now, this brings to the forefront that if you're going to invest in companies that are complicated, large corporations, it's important that you use a rating service or depend upon a rating service, because most people don't have the wherewithal to go do this type of investigation. They're going to depend upon companies like MSCI or S&P 500 or Morningstar or Sustainalytics. Those are some of the different analytical companies that will rate companies and really do a lot of investigation into them. So we've taken a look at what ESG means, but we're going to go back to ask this particular question again. How do you limit or restrict investments based on your moral beliefs? We've talked about the E, the S, and the G. The first thing that you want to do is select a mutual fund or an EFT that fits your criteria as close as possible. The second method is to select individual stocks. And then the third method is going to be, you could invest directly into an index. And this is really my preferred method, because I can get very granular in helping a client to pick particular investments. Let's say, for example, if you want to invest in the S&P 500, but you don't want to invest in companies that are involved in alcohol, or you don't want to invest in companies that are involved in animal testing, then those can be excluded from that particular index, and you own just the companies that you want, and you only trade them when it's important to you and not to the index in itself. But we go back and we look at what we talked about at the very beginning. How do you use your newfound knowledge? There's 3 steps. Number 1, clarify your beliefs. Number 2, determine which investment process that you want to use. And then last but not least, just set up an account and then monitor the process that goes along. Okay, that brings us to the end of that portion that we've talked about today. I hope that this has been useful to you. You know, it's really difficult at times just to go out and say, this is the right investment that I want to invest in. And even though I might be vegan or I might be Christian, does that investment fit me? Well, hopefully this information will help you just a little bit. I'm going to look real quickly and see what questions or comments that we might have had for today. And I want to go through just a couple of things that have been brought up. One of the questions that I had was, could you make any recommendations on vegan investments? And as I mentioned before, I'm not going to make a specific investment recommendation to you. I really can't do that because I don't know anything about you just by doing a live stream. But I'm going to give you a couple of different companies that you might want to be aware of. This comes from Morningstar, and if you go to morningstar.com, you can find this information also. But just to go through a couple of them that was brought to my attention is probably one of the most popular vegan investments that's out there is the U.S. Vegan Climate ETF. And this is an index fund. It's an unmanaged fund, which is I think it's a really good way to look at investing. But that's specific to that. Now, if you put that into your search engine, you can find it. It's the U.S. Vegan Climate ETF Vegan Fund. And actually the symbol is VEGN. And it's not a recommendation, just to make you aware of it. Something that I help the clients with, that I work with, is finding investments that will specifically not invest in particular areas, using the negative grid. When I say grid, what I'm talking about, it's a filter to filter out companies that might do animal testing or use animal products. That's what they're doing at the U.S. Vegan Climate Fund. Another company which has been doing this for a really, really long time is Calvert. And Calvert has quite a few different funds. Now, these are all mutual funds. Remember, with mutual funds, you have different fees that are associated with it, as you do with an ETF too. So you need to be aware of those and ask about those before you put any money into it. And I'll say it, you'll read it at the very beginning, at the end in the disclosure, and that is that the past performance of investments is not indicative of their future results. But the Calvert company does a good job. Actually, John Hancock also has a few investments that are utilized for climate change and for vegan investments as well. Now, another question that I got was centered around religious-based investments, and this is really based on Christianity. And looking at Christianity and other different avenues of investment that's based on morals and beliefs, how it's selected is really broad. You could pick one that would satisfy one Christian that might not satisfy another. So you need to really investigate how they filter out particular investments. Do they filter out alcohol? Do they filter out firearms? Do they filter out pornography? Do they filter out you just pick it, and from that standpoint. But here are a couple of companies that do a pretty good job, but you want to investigate if they fit to you. One of them is called Event Tide, and it's Event Tide Asset Management. You can look that up on the web. Another is called Praxis Mutual Funds. That's a mutual fund company that you can look up. Also, a very popular one is the Timothy Fund. There's also Crossmark Global Investments and Guidestone Financial. Also, another one is Inspire Investing. I like Inspire Investing because they have an ETF that's Christian-based that works pretty well too. And I follow that quite a bit. So hopefully this gives you the information that will help you pick investments that fit whatever morals or beliefs that you follow, and it'll help you to feel better about what you're investing in. Remember that idea that I talked about at the very beginning. It's not nice to feel like that you're being taken advantage of, and hopefully this information will put you more in control of your investments and help you find the investments that do fit you. I'd like to thank you for listening today. And if you have any questions, make sure that you enter them into the comment section. Even after today, if you're listening to this on a replay, I monitor the comments throughout the week, and I'll be sure to get back to you. And perhaps it'll be one that I post during the week that you'll be able to listen to as well. So thanks a lot, and I hope that y'all have a really great week.